Reminiscent of modern layouts in English cities like Birmingham, Leeds and Liverpool, the final 3 miles was on Central Reservation, the last section of which dated from June 1935. The decision to abandon the loss-making system seems to have been based on rising electricity costs, over-cheap fares, and the opening of the Ashok Leyland bus plant. Also, the company may well have opted to follow London's example by implementing a tram scrapping policy. One of the former centre entrance Pullmans. Another recently repainted Pullman. Although no official ceremony was arranged to mark the final closure, thousands thronged the route, applauding Car 103, packed to the gills, as it processed slowly into the history books on the 31st of March, 1964. Following the closure, 45 sets of maximum traction trucks, controllers and motors were sold for further use in Calcutta. Although the Calcutta Tramways Company did remain British-owned for many years following independence, it was managed by the state of West Bengal after August 1967. Now the state-owned CTC operates India's last surviving tramway. The Calcutta story begins with a short-lived meter-gauge horse line opened in 1873. This was followed by a larger network of lines, probably built to the 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge. These were opened progressively by the Calcutta Tramways Company between 1880 and 1884. At times, steam trams were also used. Electric trams first appeared in 1902, and for the next 30 years a variety of 2-axle, first-class single-decker motor cars were built, together with matching second-class trailers. Starting in 1948 and continuing well into the 60s, many were rebuilt and permanently coupled together. Known as Streamlined Trains or utility cars, M-Class numbers 1 to 179 were of special interest to visiting British enthusiasts, as some had trucks acquired from systems such as Leeds, Leicester, Oldham and Stockport. Eventually their collection of inherited motors would be replaced by imports from Hungary. These M's feature prominently in the following film sequences, taken between 1960 and 1978 by Messrs. Cunningham, Healy, Matthews, Santarelli and Todd. The CTC never operated double-deckers and only a handful of conventional bogie cars. These were J-class numbers 301 to 306, built by English Electric in 1931 on maximum traction bogies. Somewhat rebuilt, this view shows one later in life, coupled to a four-wheel trailer. English Electric also provided the first three examples of the much more successful K-class. Like the J's, 307 to 309 were delivered in 1931. Referred to by the CTC as the articulated or English cars, a further 180 Ks, numbers 310 to 489, were built locally between 1932 and 1939. Conceived and first tested in England, each end has a powered maximum traction truck with an unpowered equal wheel truck under the articulation. All the truck's motors and controllers coming from English Electric. Like the J-class, they were fitted with air brakes, as were all subsequent new cars. The Ks had two entirely separate body sections, each with its own drop centre entrance, there being no physical connection between the first and second class saloons. The official overall capacity of about 120 was often exceeded. During the early 60s, when these sequences were filmed, most Ks still looked relatively smart in their grey and cream, a colour scheme which had displaced the original chocolate and cream with delivery of the Js and Ks in 1931. After the Ks came the Streamlined L-class articulateds 490 to 559, built between 1942 and 1951. When first delivered, these cars supported a top-heavy cowling on the roof of the first-class saloon, which had concealed the resistances. As on these post-war Ls, this cowling was later reduced in size. Like the Ks, each car carried a crew of 3, supplemented in P cars on the busiest sections by extra conductors, known as line conductors. Although all their equipment was from English Electric, the Ls differed from the earlier Ks in riding on 3 equal wheel trucks. During the 50s, several Ks had been rebuilt, with lengthened bodies and slightly different rear ends to the Ls. In this view, the rebuilt K is on the left. This shows the more rounded front end. Nonapuka Works handled everything from building new bodies to keeping older veterans on the road. When the state took over the company in 1967, it had envisaged phasing out the trams by the early 70s, but oil prices, pollution and a change of heart by planners led to the decision to retain the system. Using some of the second-hand equipment purchased from Bombay, 201 to 206 entered service in the mid-60s. These were experimental first-class PAYE cars. Several older vehicles were also adapted for PAYE and painted in this striking cream and blue livery. However, the PAYE concept proved impractical and was dropped about 1970. There was no doubt the trams played a major part in moving Calcutta's millions. For example, in 1959 there were some 26 services operating from 8 depots over the 42-mile system, and they carried a staggering 400 million passengers. Prior to the introduction of route numbers in 1958, coloured symbols and lights had been used. One of the most impressive structures in Calcutta is the 28,000 tons Neuhauser Bridge, opened in 1943. This cantilever structure allowed trams to cross the Hooghly for the first time. It also ended the long-standing isolation of 3 local lines in Howrah. Although photography of or in the vicinity of the bridge was strictly forbidden, these next sequences capture the bridge in all its glory, with the trams arriving and departing from their terminal loop outside Howrah station. By the early 60s, most shorter distance commuter trains were EMUs, but with steam still covering longer distance journeys. Until their complete closure in 1971, the 2-foot gauge Martin's Light Railway services terminated at Howrah Maiden Station, opened in 1948. Most of the tiny locos had been built to the same design by Hunslet between 1906 and 1955. Every day, endless hordes of commuters battle their way onto the non-stop procession of overladen trams and floor-scraping buses. In the early 60s, most local bus operations had been nationalised, with passenger loadings exceeding 500 million per year. Howrah's 3 local routes, which served some of the worst areas of urban deprivation, never offered first-class accommodation. Because the Sibpur line ended in a stub with a trolley reverser, Howrah Depot maintained some 30 double-ended C and D class cars. Starting in 1960, a few were given new bodies. A rare view of E-Class 297 with a trailer in Howrah in 1961. Crippling congestion would lead to suspension of the 2 Bandagat routes in October 1970. The 3 locals, 40, 41 and 42, had their own loop close to the station. A short distance from the loop, the Bandagat route swung away to the right, whilst the Sibpur cars turned left. Note inbound E-Class motorcar and trailer. The last local, the 40, was abandoned on the 5th of December 1971. The Sibpur cars crossed the long bridge spanning the approaches to Howrah station and the tracks serving the many riverside wharves. After the closures, most of these elderly 2-axle cars crossed the river, where a few, freshly painted, ran as single first-class only units. Then in the mid-70s, others were transformed into the final batch of Streamlined Trains, for which the company also built brand new trailers. Given the numbers between 180 and 192, some appeared in this somewhat garish livery. "172 was mounted on ex-Stockport trucks. Bran Healy filmed the trams in 1978, immediately before the CTC received an injection of cash from the World Bank, which enabled them to embark on some long overdue modernisation. For example, many of the articulateds will be given new or totally refurbished bodies. The city was also in a state of ongoing upheaval as it struggled to build its first metro. This would eventually impact on the tramways, leading to closures and route alterations. At its maximum, the large CTC fleet had been accommodated in 8 depots. Joining the fleet between 1974 and 1976 had been 27 company-built deluxe or Sundari articulateds, most of these riding on ex-Bombay maximum traction trucks. Later known as Class S, there were some differences. For example, the majority were first class only. Some also had twin as opposed to single headlights. However, all 27 had single-piece windscreens and roller-blind destinations. When Alan Morrison made his visit in November 1980, large areas of the city were in a state of upheaval due to metro construction. Here Rail Scrubber 2, complete with its drinking water trailer, rolls into Esplanade. Redesigned in 1952, Esplanade consisted of an amazing spider's web of loops and sidings. This was the system's operational hub. Except for one instance, all other termini had turning circles. Watching these action-packed sequences allows time for a few comments on the state-owned company's labour relations in the early 80s. The huge workforce of nearly 9,000 employees meant that for every tram there were nearly 32 men. Drivers and conductors received equal pay, with the latter also getting bonuses relating to the amount of fares collected. A driver received 4 months training, a conductor 3 weeks, but also had to demonstrate a grasp of the 3 major languages, Hindi, Bengali and English. The company also had a strong family tradition, as most men on retiring at 60 could nominate their own successor. Graham Mather was one of 12 British enthusiasts to make an extensive study of the tramway in October 1980. During the trip, Graham produced this remarkable record of the system, including many sections which, since opening of the metro, have subsequently closed. His coverage begins on the heavily used link from Howrah station across the Hooghly. By this time, many cars were carrying a harder-wearing dark blue paint scheme. Turning from Strand Road into Hare Street. At BBD Bag, formerly Dalhousie Square, which in 1980 was terminus for some 10 lines, as well as numbers of frequent short workings. Looking far from beautiful, this battered Sundari, Sundari means beautiful in Bengali, trundles in on the 25, with clear evidence that its roller blinds were no longer working. Wellington Junction. Mahatma Gandhi Road. On October the 22nd, the party boarded Sundari 580 in Gariahat Depot, now closed. The wire netting screens had first appeared in the late 40s to protect drivers from periodic outbursts of protest. Outside the depot, a car travels along the reserved track linking Park Circus to Gariahat Junction. By July 2004, this section had been lifted. Time was allowed for filming on the reserved track along Rashbihari Avenue. Crossing over the boat canal at Marjahat en route to Bihala. Former PAYE car on ex-Bombay trucks is seen on Diamond Harbour Road. Bihala Terminus. At the end of 1986, a 4.5-mile extension would be opened from here to Joka, where the company also built a new depot.